Welcome, everyone, to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. One quick announcement before we bring on our guest for today. We have our May Symposium coming up tomorrow, so make sure that you use the link in the chat to attend that incredible event. And with that, we'd like to formally introduce our guest for today, Stasia Obremskey, who is a managing partner at Foreground Capital. As you know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Stasia, please use the Q&A feature or the chat, and I will make sure that we get to it. With that, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Nina. Nice to be here. Excuse me. It's 9:30 here on the West Coast, so just getting our morning up and going. But hello to everyone. Look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to learn a little bit more about the self and just the work that you're doing. So maybe, Stasia, a great place for us to start is if you could just walk us through your kind of professional career journey, and really what led you to where you are right now as a managing partner.
Great. Happy to. Well, as many of you know, you're not born a venture capitalist, and everyone has a very interesting, unique path to getting here. And mine is equally, I think, unique. So I started life as a investment banker, hardcore capitalist skill set, honed at Harvard Business School, and then as a consultant at Bain and Company. But the through line was I was always really passionate about health, and I really wanted to work on healthcare clients and be exposed to healthcare challenges. And so that was the industry focus that I had really throughout my career. Early in my career, I had one of those, well, this isn't linear, but this sounds like an interesting opportunity, so let's go for it. And my husband and I headed to Asia for what was supposed to be a 3-month short-term assignment for him, and ended up being about a 7-year adventure, living in both Bangkok and Hong Kong. And so I took my private sector business skills and landed in Bangkok for what I thought was a 3-month assignment, and went to see the largest NGO in Thailand, which was run by a very famous Thai named Nichai Viravaidya, who was sort of the father of family planning. And so again, Thailand was in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. I'd just done some AIDS work for some corporate clients in the US. And so I just knocked on the door and said, here's my skill set. I'm here for a short period of time. Would love to be of service in any way I can. And I happen to know a bit about the, HIV AIDS, and maybe that could be useful given that you're one of the emerging AIDS advocate organizations in Thailand. And so they'd just gotten funding from the Ford Foundation to do a study on the economic impact of AIDS on Thailand. And they looked at me and they said, can you do this? And like any good consultant, I said, of course I can. And so I spent a year really traveling throughout Thailand, trying to understand really the core of the epidemic in Thailand. And because of Michai's world-class reputation, I had access to every AIDS expert in the world. And people would say to me, are you an epidemiologist? And I'd be like, yeah, well, sort of. Are you an economist? Well, yeah, sort of. But I sort of used my broad base of consulting skills, and we wrote a report on the economic impact of AIDS on Thailand, which he then used to convince the government to deploy a fair amount of resources towards prevention in hopes of, preventing. It was just a cost-benefit analysis, a lot of additional costs 10 years down the road. So that work, I bring that up because it really informed my long-term worldview that the two most important things you could do for the world were to educate women and to give them the tools to manage their fertility, and really seeing in the context of developing country what impact both education and family planning had on the lives of women, and therefore the lives of their family and the communities, has really been a through line through my whole both professional and philanthropic work from that point on. So anyway, that's a long story of detour. I then came back to the US, retooled myself as a CFO, had 3 kids, retooled myself as a CFO, working for mainly healthcare startups in the Bay Area, often helping them set up their accounting and finance functions and helping them raise their first round of venture funding. So I would sit on the other side of the table from the VCs, help structure the initial rounds of funding, again, get them set up to manage those funds. Mm-hmm. And in my spare time, my avocation continued to be to invest in women and girls, both as an impact investor and as a philanthropist, both internationally and in the US. And so about 7 years ago. I'm getting to the place of how I became a venture capitalist about
Oh, this is just an incredible story.
About 7 years ago, I met up with a woman named Ruth Shaber, who was a OBGYN by training, had the good fortune to become a full-time philanthropist, was granting a lot of money in the reproductive health, women's health space, and realized that grant dollars were good for some things, but they really weren't good for what she thought the sector needed, having all the unmet needs in women's health as a physician. And that was really innovation, and you need equity dollars and a venture capital ecosystem to fuel that innovation. And so she said, "Hey, I think there's something here." It was a very, very nascent days of the emerging women's health sector, but she said, "Let's join forces." I met my partner Elizabeth Bailey, who's based in Boston, and we co-founded something called RH Capital, which was the first platform which we built to deploy capital to innovations in women's health. And so that's how I became. And for me, I always say that it's my dream job. I got to combine my passion for women and women's health with my professional toolkit. And I needed all those random stops along the way to get me here. But that is how I, at a rather advanced stage, became a venture capitalist. It's been a pleasure and exciting to see the evolution of the space, certainly over the last 8 years. And I'm really excited about the momentum and the opportunities going forward.
That's so powerful. There's so many questions I had planned on asking you, but I just want to dive into some of the things that you were talking about. That is, wow, what I can only imagine, and kind of what you spoke to around the work that you've done in Thailand being such a formative experience. As you were kind of speaking to that, and especially kind of the work that you've done, the economic development component, I'm so curious, were there any particular like insights or like cultural nuances that you've kind of uncovered because you've worked in two different markets for it? Any things that you remember that you thought were particularly interesting?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yes. And I would say, as a privileged white woman showing up in Thailand with my set of cultural norms and values, it was really important to just be open and curious about the lives that these women and girls were living, and not to really make judgments. In Thailand, and particularly the AIDS epidemic, was fueled by like all of the hotspots. It was fueled by IV drug use. It was fueled by homosexuality. It was really predominantly fueled by heterosexual transmission, because prostitution was then really endemic, and not just the international piece, which tends to get a lot of the publicity and is sort of seen as the, sexy, shiny piece of it. But really every village, every rural district area, had brothels, and it was kind of part of the culture. And I would describe it as British men stopped at the pub on the way home from work. Thai men had this cultural norm to stop at the brothel on the way home from work, and kind of a cultural acceptance of that. And that challenged my, very Western beliefs. And I spent a lot of time in brothels and talking to women and traveling around the country, trying to understand, what was really the core risk of the Thai particular situation. And, I would visit these rural, poor communities and, look at the economic opportunities these women had. And on some level, they were making rational economic decisions. They would go into prostitution for 3 to 4 years. They would save a lot of money. They would send it back to their families, to the temples. They would come home. They would go away. They wouldn't do this in their own province. They would go away. They'd come home several years later, get married, have a little nest egg, and kind of live happily ever after. That was obviously pre-AIDS. And so what we were seeing was obviously these women now were, while they were making economically rational decisions, given their other option, which was to be rice farmers or, small town merchants, and not have those kind of economic opportunities which prostitution allowed them. Now that was a deadly, trade-off they were expected to make. But again, it really, I said, these people are making rational economic decisions. I don't know how they make them emotionally, physically, psychologically, and it's too bad they don't have better economic opportunities. But you had to have some empathy, and you had to be really open and non-judgmental about that work. So it really challenged at a formative stage of my career, really challenged me to think differently about, something that is, often stigmatized or not, not considered acceptable in the Western context.
Mm-hmm. No, that was so interesting. And I can only imagine, the incredible lens that has afforded you to really do the work that you're doing right now. I am kind of curious with specifically this work, but also just, working as a CFO, kind of being on the other side of the coin, working with NGOs. Like, are there any kind of particular like philosophies that just your collective experiences have that you've now been able to bring in as a managing partner of a VC fund? Any, one or two things that come to mind for you?
Yeah. First of all, I should probably say you don't know this because I'm on Zoom, but I'm a 6 foot tall blonde woman. So you can imagine me walking into these places in Thailand. I was an anomaly myself, and I was grateful that they accepted me and shared with me, very detailed, intimate aspects of their lives. So yes, I would say one lesson I have learned across the nonprofit and the for-profit startup sector is that cash is king. And as the CFO, it was often my job to be the keeper of that cash and to be the one who asked the critical questions about, are we sure this is highest and best use of our dollars right now? Is there another way to get this resource that we need for less money, or can we postpone this, or how's this going to really affect our cash flow? I mean, I used to call myself in the startups, I was the adult in the room, or I was the Dr. No who had to say, I know, wouldn't that be great? We'd really love to do that, but look at my cash balance right now. It's just, we can't afford to do it right now. And so yes. I think in the life of a startup, you have so many ambitions, you have so many priorities, but if you don't have cash, you can't do any of those. And so I just think you really, really have to pay attention to what you were spending your cash on, and is it getting you to where you need to go in order to raise more cash? Because in the venture capital startup cycle, it's really all about, do you have enough cash to get to raise more cash? And in order to do that, what are the milestones you're gonna have to meet? What are you gonna have to show? What are you gonna have to excite investors with in order to have that story to keep going to get more cash? So that, to me, is the most important lesson I have learned across my career as a CFO, as a venture capitalist, as someone in the nonprofit sector who has watched organizations die because they run out of cash, even though they're doing great work.
I mean, that's actually an incredible segue, because now would love to learn and have our audience learn a little bit more about Foreground Capital and the work that you're doing there. Can you, maybe a great place to start is if you could just share with us a little bit more about Foreground Capital. Is there a particular stage or space that you are really kind of directing a lot of your investments towards?
Sure. And to do that, I probably need to back up a little bit and just talk about that transition between RH Capital, which was our predecessor firm, and Foreground Capital. And it wasn't just a rebranding, it was really a spin out of the team that built Foreground, or that built RH Capital, through two funds, RH Capital One and RH Capital Fund Two, where we have invested in 24 companies, all in the women's health space, mostly the reproductive health space, focusing on maternal health, contraception, technology and access, and what we call other high impact areas of reproductive health. Those are our predecessor funds. That fund was sort of pre-seed, seed, Series A. Average check size was $500,000 to $1.5 million. We led several deals if they were appropriately sized in that portfolio. The weighted average length of time of that pour is about almost a little less than 3 years. So it's still very early stage. We transitioned out of RH Capital in the fall to Foreground Capital. As I said, same team. We are broadening our investment mandate a little bit to include what I call the broader health of women. So we used to think of women's health as those things that just directly impact women. Now we really look at things that disproportionately impact women and differentially impact women. So we'll look at, in this new fund, we'll look at, osteoporosis, urinary incontinence, migraines, Alzheimer's, those things that, disproportionately. And then on the differentially, things like in the cardiac or stroke area, which we know women have completely different disease experiences than men, and we need tailored solutions for that said. So again, a little bit of broader investment focus of Foreground Capital. 3, we are in the market raising. So I have incredible empathy for all of the startups who are on this call and who are raising money too, because we spend a good part of every day of our week also doing that. So we're in conversations. I'm happy to say that we are approaching a first close on 20 million of the $75 million target. That will happen in the next couple of weeks. And then we can start deploying out of that fund. It will be probably a little later, seed, Series A, a little larger check size, mainly because we see a real gap in the market of funds who are willing to lead women's health deals around the Series A size. And so with check size of $3 million, we can lead a $12 million or $15 million Series A round. And we think we can help catalyze the right kind of syndicate around that. We get asked to lead in our Foreground, or I'm sorry, in the predecessor funds quite a bit, but because of our domain expertise in women's health and our ability to understand comps and be able to price and structure a deal, but if we don't have the capital necessary, given the round size, we think it sends a negative signal to the market. So we have to have both the capital and the expertise, and it needs to be appropriate for the round size.
No, that makes
Miss
a lot of
anything? Is there
sense.
anything else in particular around Foreground that would be helpful?
No, I think that was incredibly helpful. And also congrats on closing the first kind of chunk that, I'm sure is probably such a huge sigh of relief.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think on that note too, for maybe some of the folks on the call that are founders or kind of in the startup space, would love if you could share a little bit more around your process for kind of identifying investment opportunities. Is there a particular philosophy or kind of structure that you use to kind of go through that process?
Yeah, good question. So we source deals from a variety of areas. We do some thesis driven, research ourselves and then go out and talk to companies. We are in the ecosystem very broadly. I think in May there were a half a dozen conferences on both coasts and in between that our team covers. So we love the growing ecosystem, both of investors and of startups, and we really try to be present and participate in those forums and contribute to those conversations. And then, we have a website where we do have some inbound, which we get referrals from we have 24 companies now, the 24 great entrepreneurs. They have networks, so we get a lot of inbound or referrals from them. There are not many women's health focused funds. So if you're in the women's health sector, you probably heard of RH Capital or Foreground or one of my partners, Elizabeth or Alice Singh. So that's sort of how we source deals. We are an impact forward fund, which means we really screen for 4 impact pillars. And our impact lens is really around health equity. And so we're looking for things that are truly transformative innovations to really dramatically change the standard of care. We're looking for things that increase access, particularly for marginalized communities, whether it's along racial, ethnic, geographic lines. We're looking for things that really are affordable. So we will take FDA risks because we know that's how you get reimbursed. We don't do a lot of direct to consumer because sometimes it doesn't meet our affordability hurdle. And then we care a lot about addressing systemic bias in the system, which we know exists in the healthcare system along racial or gender lines. And so companies that have culturally appropriate care or that can really address some of those systemic barriers meet our impact screen. So the first screen we do is, can we make an impact case for this company? If we can, you don't have to meet all 4 pillars, you just have to meet one. And if you do, then you come into the funnel and we engage in kind of a full due diligence process. And again, the screens are, we look at the pitch deck, we meet as a team. If we like what we see, we'll often invite at the front end the startup team to pitch to the whole partner group, which is 3 of us. We then decide whether we're going to, it's like a big decision tree, go, no go. If it's a go, then we write something called an investment brief, which is almost like a red flag, really one-page synopsis of the opportunity. And if there's still a lot of excitement or we haven't unearthed anything that we're concerned about, then we move to full due diligence. We are known for going very deep and very technical. We invest across the healthcare segment, which I probably should have said in the beginning. So we have a life science portfolio, we have a service digital enabled, tech, and we have a little bit of consumer, but we have a lot of expert networks, which we tap for, because I am not a PhD scientist. My partner, Alice, is a MD. She did go to medical school, so she has some clinical expertise, and she has a big network of clinicians from her educational experience. So deep diligence for us takes about 6 weeks before we get it through committee. We still write old-fashioned investment memos, 25 to 30 pages. We share those pretty generously with other co-investors who are learning about the women's health sector or are not as familiar with a particular indication, because we really want to catalyze as much capital as we can into the space. And we feel like sharing our expertise and our networks of experts is one way of doing that.
Absolutely.
And then obviously if we get through and I always say the investment memo is not just about, it is what helps us come to a decision. I mean, really, it is that process of gathering, synthesizing, and then getting to a decision point. When you've looked at all the various factors about an investment, that gets to the final go, no go decision.
That was incredibly helpful and incredibly comprehensive. So thank you for that. I'm sure everyone that was listening, that is kind of currently going through a raise or gearing up for it, I think just walking through the steps was really, really great for me. I'm so curious. I know we have about 6 minutes, so I would love to kind of learn a little bit more about what you had said. You kind of started a little bit earlier, kind of talking about just the change that you've seen in the broader, women's health industry in the past couple of years. Would love if you can share, what's getting you excited, what has changed for you more broadly. Any insights that you have around that.
Yeah, so I'll start at the 10,000 level foot, and then I'll come down. So I think the thing that I am most excited about, and I have to say, I think we really need to credit Gen Z, Gen X. I don't know what gen we're in now, but and a little bit the social media platforms, which allow people to have voice. And I think for so long, all these conditions that women have were invisible because women didn't speak about them. They were stigmatized, they were embarrassing, they were taboo, at least for many generations. And I do think that we sort of put up with a lot of things, and because of that, they were invisible to the broader men, population, community, investors. And so I want to thank the younger generation who, bitch and moan about a lot of things. But I think one of the silver linings of that is what was invisible is now visible. And what was unacceptable, or what was acceptable is now unacceptable. And I think first and foremost, there's just been an incredible elevation of the problems that exist. And I use the example of, I think it was last year's Super Bowl, the first ad that came up was an ad on menopause. I think it was related to hot flashes. And like the thought that on that platform, that topic would be on national TV with all those millions of people, it's like, oh, we have come a long way. I mean, in some ways, right?
Totally.
And I think we have to keep talking about these things, whether it's endometriosis, PCOS, period pain, how we don't like our hormonal birth control methods. We want, which are good enough, but they don't meet all of our needs. And it's like, no, we're not settling for second best. So first and foremost, use your voice, make these things visible, keep complaining, because I think that has normalized some of these conditions and turn them from, not being able to be talked about. So once we can now talk about them, then we can sit in a room and really come up with solutions and devote resources to them. So I think that's been good in terms of broadly. I think there's been more innovation, right? So when we started 8 years ago, we had a pipeline with 100 kind of deals in it. Now we have a pipeline with a couple thousand deals in it. So we are seeing a lot more explosion in innovation. There needs to be more, absolutely, particularly in the life science space, and the problem there is a lot of the underlying biology is not understood. So until you understand the biology, until you can identify targets, then you can drug or address those targets. That's just a long, I'm really concerned about all the cutbacks in the NIH funding, because that is what really builds that pipeline of core biological understanding of conditions. So that's on the negative side. But again, on the positive side, we're seeing many more life science opportunities than we did 5 years ago. So again, it's all relative, right? It's not as much as we need, but it's better than what we had before. We are seeing more investor interest. There are half a dozen relatively small women's health focused funds, but we're seeing a lot of interest from both generalists, the big biotech bio bros, as I call them, health generalist fund, and we need them. They are Series B, Series C. They need to. I always say it's like a fire brigade. Like, we take the bucket so far, and then we need someone to hand the bucket to move it down the line, and we need them engaged. And we're seeing a lot more of those types of firms and funds pay attention and be curious about what's going on. And then I think lastly, the thing I'm most encouraged about is we're seeing a lot of interest from strategics, which we didn't see 5 years ago. We're in conversations for our own fundraise with entities which I would have been shocked 5 years ago that they would have been looking to put money into a early stage venture fund because they want access to the pipeline of women's health innovations. All those are really good leading indicators. It's not happening fast enough. It's not happening at the scale of capital that I want, but it is certainly a sea change from what was going on 5 years ago.
That is phenomenal. And I just realized we're at time, and what a powerful way to end. I think, Stasia, just really, I think to your point, we may not be moving fast enough, but I think the fact that we are moving, that steps are being taken, is so incredible, and must have been so good for you to see, having been in the space for a while. So thank you so much for taking the time just to chat with us. It was such an enlightening conversation for me.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much, Stasia. Make sure you join us next week for our next Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for this incredible conversation, as well as one last huge thank you to our guest. And we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.